It was said over and over again by the state media of the Democratic Republic of the Soslian people that humans, in spite of their bluffs and bluster, were a weak and pathetic species. It was said that human bones were brittle, and their brains were slow, and their muscles were weak and underdeveloped. And the poor humans, whose gestation process took 9 months to be completed, did not even have the advantage of breeding faster than the Soslians to compensate for their inherent inferiority. The population of the Terran Union, in fact, was stated to only be 12 billion people, a far cry below the Democratic Republic's 18 billion, and a clear sign that the only thing the Union could expect from a war against the Republic was a quick and one-sided bloodbath. That was why the Union was pursuing peace with the Republic, the state media said. The humans, stupid though they were clearly not foolish enough to pick a fight with a species that was clearly their superior. For 8 decades, the Soslian People's Defense Force had been gearing up for a fight against the Terran Union, with the Republic's Supreme Council investing more and more of their budget into the already formidable military. As funds were diverted away from public welfare and civilian government, poverty began to grow, but the Supreme Council did nothing to lift its citizens out of the pit they had put them in. After all, they needed recruits to serve in their military. And, as the ever-increasing crime rate had proven, people in poverty would do anything to escape it. For those poor Soslians who lived in the slums of their sprawling cities, neglected by their leaders and looked down on by their peers, there was but one way to catapult them and their families to success in the regime: enlistment in the military. From there, recruits had 2 paths to take before they could reap the rewards of their service. First was to fight in one of the Democratic Republic's many ongoing wars, whether it was putting down insurgents at home or conquering enemy worlds abroad, and achieve military glory as they rose through the ranks. This path, though enticing to those who sought cheap thrills and the glory of battle, and rejoiced upon hearing the thunderclap sound of railguns or the fried meat sizzle of an energy rifle, was a dangerous one. Nearly a third of Soslian People's Defense Force recruits did not survive combat. Generals spent their soldiers' lives callously, knowing that no matter how many died, there would always be more desperate troops to replace them. Millions of men and women, all high on their regime's propaganda and desperately clamoring for a chance to prove their worth in battle, were thrown into the meat grinder of war without a care for their lives or sanity. Those veterans who survived were compensated well for their service. Many, however, did not survive. But there was another path, one much less dangerous and easier to bear for both the body and the mind. The screaming masses of cannon fodder would always be there, always be ready to be thrown at objectives or grind down enemy armies, but there would always be a need for charismatic, brilliant, and above all else, loyal commanders to lead those armies into battle. The Soslian People's Defense Force, though it saw far more action attacking others than it ever fought in defense, was sorely in need of officers. And to fill that need, the defense academies were created. Acceptance into a defense academy was a cause for celebration for any Soslian. Even the wealthy and middle class, who had mostly turned their sons and daughters away from the life of a defense force grunt, rejoiced when they received word from the local academy master that their child had been selected to join the ranks of the gifted few. To get into a defense academy, one had to be brave, talented, intelligent, and above all else, lucky. Only those born into wealth or high status, whose parents had the connections and money to hire tutors and place their children into rigorous education programs, had any realistic chance at passing the Defense Academy admissions exam and being one of the few elite hundreds chosen out of an applicant pool that was often in the low millions. 119 out of the 120 students in the 32nd accepted class of the 184th Soslian People's Defense Force Defense Academy, or just the Defense Academy for most of them, were selected from applicants in the top 1% of wealth, connections, and social status. Cadet Arslai Vesalric, born to impoverished parents in the slums of Megacity 91, was the sole exception. Cadet Valsalric had not been fed from a silver spoon and doted on by servants and drones for all of her childhood. She had not been taught how to stand straight and greet a superior with dignity in a house coated in jewels and gold. She had not known luxury. She had not known freedom. All she had known was poverty, hunger, fear, and an inexorable drive to escape the life of servitude she was unlucky enough to be born into. While her competition ate meals of gene-crafted meats prepared by professional chefs, she stole and begged to put food on her plate. While her competition played at fighting for sport, training in the martial art her countrymen practiced as part of their heritage, she fought for her life in back alleys and moldy slums. The percentage of Defense Academy cadets who came from poverty was so low that it wasn't even as big as some rounding errors. Had the Soslian government raised them out of poverty, it would have been higher, but they did not see the point. After all, if the poor were able to afford living expenses without resorting to service in the Soslian People's Defense Force, then many would simply not serve. The leadership of the Democratic Republic of the Soslian people could not afford this, not when a war against the humans was a very real, very possible, and very frightening possibility. Most Soslians did not believe that war was at their doorstep. Not even Cadet Valsalric did. They saw the news feeds of their glorious defense force in battle, heavily propagandized, of course, and they assumed that no species in the galaxy would be so foolish as to take on the might of the Democratic Republic of the Soslian people, especially not the weak and stupid humans. What they did not realize, of course, was that their news told them only what the state wanted them to hear. The Soslian People's Defense Force struggled and bled for every inch of ground it gained. The burial guns aboard their warships, where Soslian corpses were fired into the nearest star as per their tradition, were firing constantly as Soslian soldiers were thrown carelessly to their deaths. Their families were notified, and the truth was told to each and every single one of them, but it did not matter. The government controlled every source of public information. The campaigns continued. The soldiers died. And though the populace of a particular city or town might notice that their sons and daughters were killed in droves on the front or sent back to their families as trauma-ridden shells, the news would always report success on all fronts. Even Cadet Arslai Valsalric, a member of the privileged Soslian elite, had not yet been told the truth. Nor most likely would she ever. Cadet Valsalric would be given a rank and station, as would her fellow cadets, and be told to send men into the meat grinder like every other officer before her, and so many officers after. And, barring any unexpected feelings of sentiment or anything else the Republic Internal Security Agency had failed to account for in her psychological profile, she would obey. The defense academies were designed to build up their cadets in the ways that were necessary to make them leaders on the field of battle. They were also designed to break their cadets in the ways that were necessary to make them followers, unquestioningly subservient to orders from their commanders. An attack dog was useless if one could not make it heel. So, when the Terran Union began their campaign to ruin the propaganda machine of the Democratic Republic of the Soslian people, the first thing they attacked was the cadets in the defense academies. The Union President General, an aging man from the prosperous and resource-rich continent of Africa, had spoken to the Supreme Council of the Democratic Republic and made certain demands. The Supreme Council, while outraged by these demands, was inevitably forced to give in. After all, despite what the state media said, humans were hardly the weakest species they knew of. And those Selosians who knew the truth about humans knew very well that the Terran Union was not a nation-state it was wise to offend. On September 24th, 2303, the last days of the Republic began. The first human delegation made a visit to the 184th Defense Academy. Arslai Valsalric, a cadet in the first Defense Academy class to ever be barred from graduation, was among the first Soslians in the galaxy to witness the beginning of their ruling government's end. The day, despite what would happen later on, began just like any other day for her and her cadre mates. Cadets were organized into cadres of 12, all selected based on their scores on the entrance exam and occasionally rearranged as needed, and Arsly had been assigned to one of the lowest. She did not suspect her instructors of placing her there because of her family's low status, and she was right not to. The Soslian military couldn't care less about who a cadet's parents were or how many zeros they had in their bank account. All that mattered to the Soslians People's Defense Force was how well Cadet Vasiliak could lead a force of soldiers in battle, and based on her score on the entrance exam, she could not lead well at all. Her cadre mates, while all skilled at different things, were on average equally incompetent. They were not incapable of achieving success, but they struggled hard for each victory they won. Even in the simulated war games, which cadets played in their free time to practice the strategies they learned in lessons, Arsly's cadre was one of the easiest to beat. Life in the defense academies was rigid, orderly, and strict. The expectations set for the cadets were high, and deviation from them was severely punished. Every day, the cadres awoke before the sun could shine on their part of the planet and began the day with a rigorous program of physical exercise. Most cadets, rich and pampered children of Soslian elites, had never experienced such brutal physical training before. Cadet Visalrek considered it a welcome change from knife-fighting gangsters and running from the police in the ghetto she and her family called home. The food, served in 2 meals at the beginning and end of each day, was Soslian People's Defense Force standard, the same rations that were served to conscripts. Cadet Vasalriak heard many complaints about the quality of such rations, all from her more privileged cadre mates, but she never understood them. After all, when one had to scavenge scraps or beg for charity just to afford a filling meal, any proper sustenance would taste heavenly in comparison. After the first meal of the day came lessons. There were 3 main instruction courses, split throughout the day, and the cadets' free time was most often spent refining their craft in simulated war games. The best cadres in these games were rewarded. The worst were punished. Cadet Vasalrik, knowing struggle more than any other, had been spending every waking hour in lessons or a simulator. She was determined to rise to the top of the ranks, even if she had to drag her cadre mates behind her all the way. Even some instructors had become impressed by the cadets' dogged perseverance, though none ever showed it. It was common knowledge at the 184th Defense Academy that if one wished to speak to Cadet Arsly Vasalrik, they would search in the simulator rooms. And when the human ship made planetfall, and the instructor of the 184th spread the news, that was precisely where they found her.
You see, flanking maneuvers become much more effective when combined with a false retreat tactic.
She was explaining her strategy to a cadet in her cadre, Sraliva Adral, when the doors hissed open and an instructor walked in. "Attention! Instructor on deck!" The 2 cadets snapped to attention, saluting in the Soslian fashion until they were dismissed. "Cadet Vasalrik," the instructor addressed her. He had worked with her cadre before, and while he had a very low opinion of the bunch, Arsly Vasalrik was wise and respectful enough not to be included in that lot of miscreants. "I trust your training is going well?"
"This cadet has been educating Cadet Vaaldrel about the wisdom of integrated strategies, sir,"
Cadet Vasalrik barked.
"Cadet Vaaldrel has shown significant progress in his tactical and strategic commanding ability, sir."
"Then he'll have a chance to prove it,"
the instructor said, looking down at the 2 cadets with his unblinking, lidless eyes.
"A delegation from the Terran Union has just made planetfall. They're to participate in a war game against us. The best of their cadets against the best of ours," he explained. "Of course, neither of you will be included, but you're free to test your mettle against the human visitors afterward. I suspect you'll make short work of any of them."
"And if I don't?"
Cadet Vaaldrel asked hesitantly. He had never been particularly skilled or capable when compared to the others. In fact, he was the worst in his cadre. He'd already been downgraded twice when he fell too far behind his previous cadres, and he looked poised for a 3rd demotion. It was only through the rigorous and charitable tutelage of cadets like Arsly that he was able to avoid outright expulsion from the academy.
"Hypothetically speaking, of course." "Don't be absurd,"
Arsly reassured him.
They're humans. They have a scientifically measured intelligence level of 2.3, barely above the threshold to be considered sapient. Haven't you been watching the state media?
The instructor turned to Cadet Viadrel.
If you had the intellectual deficiency needed to even compete with humans, much less lose to them, you'd never have made it into a defense academy in the first place.
He spoke confidently and assuredly, like all wrong people did before they realized they were wrong.
We expect success of all our cadets today, Cadet Viadrel. You, if you are lucky, will be among those privileged enough to deliver it.
With that, he turned and marched off. His duty, alerting the cadets in the simulator room, was done. While it could have been done via the Defense Academy's announcement system, the instructors often felt it wiser to go room by room and break news like this to each individual cadet. As long as time was not of the essence, the ability to speak to and assess individual cadets on a regular basis was invaluable as part of the teaching experience.
Don't worry about it, Srali,
Arsly said.
Even the worst cadet here is like High Admiral Sir Verlai compared to those things. Like I said, they're barely sapient. Anything less up there than what they have, and they'd never have cleared their homeworld's atmosphere.
She tapped her head for emphasis.
It'll be a beatdown.
I know,
Srali replied.
Logically, I know that, but I'm still nervous.
He made no attempt to hide it either.
What's it called when you can't help but feel afraid, even though you know you're going to win?
It's called being an idiot, Srali,
Arsly told him.
And you, for all the crap the instructors give you, are one of the smartest Soslians on this entire planet. Never forget that.
Cadet Viadrel brightened at that.
Thank you, Arsly. I'll try not to.
Then the announcement crackled. All cadets, report to the parade field. All cadets, report to the parade field.
We've got to start going then,
Arsly said, heading for the door.
Come on, Srali. The instructors will whoop us if we show up late.
Cadet Vasalrik had to agree with that. The two cadets reported promptly to the parade field, assembling with the rest of their cadre on the gray tiles of the Defense Academy's floor. Within minutes of their arrival, the entire Academy's student body had assembled at the field. Unfortunately for them, it was a field in name only. The room, like every other part of the Defense Academy, was enclosed on all sides. Even the instructors did not get to see the sun unless they looked through a window. The parade field was a circular facility in the middle of the Defense Academy campus, where ceremonies, graduations, and most frequently, physical training were all conducted. Its walls were painted with artists' renderings of the greatest victories of the Soslian People's Defense Force. In the center of the room was a large raised podium, where a commanding officer, whose image would typically be projected by holographic projectors to gaze upon all sides of the circle, would frequently speak to the assembled cadets. Announcements typically consisted of daily schedules, unusual events, and a healthy dose of Democratic Republic propaganda to ensure loyalty among its future officers. The domed strip above them was lit by strips of blue lighting, mimicking the sky above it, and Cadet Valsilric watched as it began to trundle open. One of the planet's two suns was directly overhead, with the other not far to its left, and, for a moment, the view was blinding. The cadet's eyes took precious moments to adjust before she saw the unfamiliar shape of a sleek white shuttle descending to the field. Its engines roared, blue flames spewing from the thrusters on its belly. The ship was beautiful, especially so when compared to the boxy armored designs of the Soslian People's Defense Force. Still, Vasalrik knew any Defense Force craft could likely blow that human vessel into scrap metal if it so pleased. Its elegant lines and pristine hull would hardly save it from a Soslian air-to-air missile.
They don't even have chameleon armor,
another cadet whispered, mocking the Union ship's design.
Pathetic creatures.
Cadet Vasalric knew the Union ship was a ceremonial craft. Still, she did not correct her fellow cadet. It was best not to risk incurring the instructor's wrath, and there would surely have been dire consequences if she embarrassed the Democratic Republic on such a fateful day as this.
Cadet!
An instructor snapped. Cadet Vasalric felt relieved that she had not spoken. but she could not understand how the instructor had heard anything over the sound of the shuttle's engines. Even she had struggled to make out the words, and she was standing right next to him.
Be silent!
The cadet next to Vesalrek didn't dare to speak another word. The Terran Union shuttlecraft touched down on the podium, which had been specially cleared for the event, and it was quickly flanked on all sides by an honor guard of Soslian soldiers. Their bright purple uniforms gleamed in the sunlight, the light reflecting off the metal of their armor as they stood rigidly at attention. Cadet Vesalriek had never seen combat armor look this beautiful before. Neither had she seen an honor guard wearing combat gear before. The weapons and armor used by these army troopers were among the best in the defense force. She had to wonder why such formidable arms were necessary for a race such as humans. After all, the state media had always said they were pathetic. A set of holographic projectors, each projecting the image of a high-ranking Defense Force officer, hummed to life. "Attention, cadets!" The cadets, as they had been trained to do, all stood at attention and saluted. "This is General Arleb Zasalral of the Soslian People's Defense Force. I have reason to believe what you are about to see might dishearten you. I urge you, in the name of the Soslian people, never forget your place in the galaxy. Never forget that you, the cadets of the 184th Defense Academy, are superior. You are the best. As long as you remain loyal and you trust in your leaders, you are certain to prevail." This sent a brief murmur of confusion throughout the ranks. It was quelled quickly, even before the instructors could intervene, but the thought remained. General Sasalral had just stated the obvious. There had never been any doubt in Cadet Vesalriek's mind about the Soslian supremacy among the peoples of the galaxy. She had thought, and still thought then, that nothing could ever shake her resolve. And yet she and all her fellow cadets had to wonder, what could the humans have to reveal that would require such a reminder? The door to the shuttlecraft began to open. It was such a seamless connection that Vesalriek could never have spotted any way in if it hadn't suddenly appeared as a section of the hull melted away. No Soslian craft had ever displayed that kind of technology. The cadets watched intently as a Terran Union officer stepped through the hatchway, uniform clean and polished, and let the ranks of the Soslian People's Defense Force catch their first real glimpse of a human.
"My God, it's huge!"
Someone close to Vesalriek exclaimed. She kept her mouth shut, knowing better, but even she was shocked by the being that stood on the podium in the center of the parade field. She had been told that humans were weak and stupid creatures, with muscles like babies and bones like twigs. Cadet Vesalriek, looking at one of these sapients firsthand, could not imagine how anyone could draw that conclusion. The human was muscular, more so than any Soslian, and it stood fully twice as tall as the armed guards surrounding it. At its command, which Vesalriek was too far away to hear, a Soslian officer presented it with her ceremonial spear. She looked down in shame as she held it out, unable to bear the disgrace of betraying her people. Many others, including most cadets, also looked away. Cadet Vesalriek watched as the human broke the officer's spear across its knee.
"What the hell?"
A cadet next to her whispered.
"Who's going to shoot the beast?"
Nobody knew how to respond to that. The state media, which was unquestionable in its truthfulness, had always said that humans were weak, pathetic, unworthy of being considered the equal of any Soslian. Just like all the other races the Soslian people had either already conquered or intended to conquer in the foreseeable future. And here one was, entirely unarmed, surrounded by armed Soslian soldiers, and insulting the honor of their commanding officer in front of all the cadets in the academy. Arslai Vesalriek had seen people gunned down for even attempting to break a spear without cause. Most had done it in protest of the ruling government, which was never taken kindly, but one had simply gotten in an argument. The officer whose spear he had grabbed did not even waste a pistol round on the man before his security contingent knocked the dissident 30 meters back with their pulse guns. Last Vesalriek heard, he was serving 30 years hard labor for that offense. And somehow, the human did it with impunity. "Hear me, subjects of the Soslian state," it boomed. Cadet Vasalriak had no idea whether the intimidating creature before her was male or female. It might have even been somewhere in between, for all she knew. She was only just realizing how little she had actually been told about the humans. "Your government has lied to you. For centuries it has lied, and I am here to deliver you the truth." The honor guards looked as if they were begging to shoot this interloper. Cadet Vasalriak wished they would. Still, as if fearing the humans' wrath or the retribution of some unseen force held in its ship, they stayed their hands. One raised his rifle, charging the energy beam for a high-powered shot, but the soldier next to him was quick to force it back down. A beam of green light melted a hole in the podium's floor. "Your state media lies. It spreads deceit and propaganda, ensuring loyalty to a cause that gives none in return, and the Terran Union has long labored to break the grip your masters have upon you." The human gestured to its ship as a unit of Union officers began to file out of it. "Let I and my comrades be the men and women to begin the final steps of this hard-fought victory." Cadet Vasalriak looked anxiously to the guards. How could they stand by and watch while this human spouted such horrible lies? How could they not intervene to preserve the integrity of the state? The honor guards and their humiliated officer simply stood by and watched as if they were powerless to interfere. Cadet Vasalriak began to wonder if they were. "First, let me give you the explanation you are owed," the human said. Somebody called out, "Shoot it!" and the honor guards twitched. They looked anxiously to their commanding officer, begging for the command to open fire. Much to Vasalriak's disappointment, no order was issued. The human, though any Soslian would have been cut down by energy fire long ago, continued to speak unimpeded. "The Terran Union is, as you've no doubt already guessed, far more formidable than your ruling regime makes us out to be. Humans as a species are stronger, faster, and more importantly, smarter than any Soslian. In just 200 short years, our Terran Union has eclipsed everything your rulers have ever done." More armed Soslians, most of them in riot gear, began flooding into the parade field. "Make no mistake, your rulers would never have allowed this to come to pass if they had a choice. But the Terran Union has not given them any." The Union officer was unarmed. All of them were unarmed. They were surrounded by hundreds of the Democratic Republic's soldiers and law enforcement officers, all sporting the best equipment the Republic could afford, and yet they were allowed to speak against the state unimpeded. If there was a better way to prove the Republic's utter helplessness when compared to the Terran Union, Cadet Vasalriak could not find it.
"Somebody open fire!"
A cadet shouted. Her sentiment was echoed by many others, but none of them fired a shot. No one with a gun thought it was wise to act on that sentiment. "We would have liberated you by force of arms," the Union officer continued. "But your rulers made an ultimatum. They had organized you into tightly packed megacities, not for efficiency as they claimed, but instead to make you easier to control. If the Terran Union ever grew close to liberating a city, they said they would send bombers to turn it to dust." This spurred murmurs throughout the assembled cadets. Most did not believe the officer's words were true. They thought that the Democratic Republic's leaders would never stoop so low as to bomb their own population. Granted, before they had seen a human firsthand, none of them believed the Republic would ever lie to them. It very clearly had. 80 years passed before we grew warlike enough to call your leaders bluff. 80 years of tension, Cold War, and unchecked military expansion for both sides. The Union did not conquer as your nation conquered, with soldiers and suppressors to put down any resistance, but that is something to be explained at a later time. The Terran Union, for all its might, was not a warlike nation. Its military, though powerful enough for the Democratic Republic of the Soslian people to rightfully fear it, was not its solution of choice to its problems. With unity came prosperity, as the Terran saying went, and so the nations of the galaxy came to think of the Terran Union as a peaceful power. Not one it was wise to anger, for the Union had taught many an interloper that peaceful did not mean defenseless, but a peaceful one. "We tried to seize a city 2 weeks ago," the Union officer finally explained. We won. The bombers were shot down mid-flight. The Defense Force garrison killed or captured almost to a man. And, when your heads of state asked us for an armistice, we granted it." The man, because Cadet Valsirek was now reasonably certain that he was in fact a man, gestured around him. "The disrespect I have been allowed to show your leaders and the truth I have been allowed to tell you today are just two of the many, many conditions we imposed on them."
"What are you waiting for?" a cadet cried out. "Put a UV beam through its skull!"
This time, few spoke out in favor of this assault. The soldiers did not even bother to raise their weapons.
"Isn't anyone going to fucking do anything?"
"No," the human explained. "They will not. As of 7 days from now, the Democratic Republic of the Soslian people will be formally, officially, and effectively dissolved." There was an uproar. The Union officer waited until it had finished before continuing, but many Soslian guards felt the need to take it upon themselves to quell the perceived uprising. Still operating under the doctrine of a state that was about to cease existence, they fired pulse rifles into the crowd. Walls of energy knocked 3 cadets to the ground before the others remembered the fate of protesters and grew silent. "That was hardly necessary," the Union officer admonished the guards. "Under the Terran Union's temporary stewardship, the Soslian people will be unindoctrinated, the Soslian government will be reformed, and the Soslian economy will be, for lack of a better word, rejuvenated. I'm certain you all know of the poverty crisis that has hit your nation." Cadet Vasalriek certainly did. "Once the Terran Union takes over your territory, we will end it." That, if nothing else, would be enough to ensure Vasalriek's loyalty. "Your leaders, as per our agreement with them, will be removed from their offices and banned from holding power thereafter, but permitted to live out the rest of their lives in peace outside of Terran Union space. Do we have any questions?" Every cadet's antennae perked up. "I'm not going to answer that many questions. I apologize." The Union officer looked around. "Anyway, moving on. Needless to say, the war game is still on. If the Defense Force is to be uplifted to Terran Union standards and the Supreme Council's conditioning broken, their cadets will need to learn alongside ours. I've brought a class of new Trenton Fleet Academy graduates to engage in simulated combat against the best your academy has to offer. I understand this is likely irrelevant in comparison to what I've just said, which is why I said it last. But you cannot allow your resolve to be dampened. In the last days of the American Empire, when President Brandenburg surrendered to our predecessor, the United Nations, his people still went about their days. They conducted themselves with the discipline in face of despair that I and your leaders both expect of this class. I understand the near future will be troubling. Uplifts always are. But you cannot allow yourselves to become distracted by the ramifications of what I have just told you. The future of the Soslian race is in your hands, cadets." He lifted up his hand in a fist. "With unity comes prosperity." His Union comrades made the fist as well. Everyone else was motionless. "We'll work on that." With that, the cadets were dismissed. Some, very few of them, went to watch the war games. Cadet Vasalriek saw no reason to. After all, if the Terran Union was so powerful that it could simply order the Republic to dissolve, the only possible outcome for the Soslian cadets would be defeat. When she saw the final score, 3 hours later, she wondered how she could ever have thought humans were stupid. How her leaders could have told her such blatant lies. In the final days of the Democratic Republic of the Soslian people, many wondered such things. How could the leaders have lied? How could they have fallen? How could these power-hungry men and women, who were willing to massacre civilians to keep a hold of their empire, ever have stepped down from authority with barely any fight? But as time went on, and the Terran Union integrated itself more and more into their lives, they began to understand. The Supreme Council of the Democratic Republic had never intended to leave their position. They would never have chosen voluntarily to accept the terms the Union placed upon them. The Terran Union, however, was so supremely powerful that their enemies had not been given a choice.